Chapter 5 of Allan and the Holy Flower. This LibriVox Recording is in the public domain. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 5 Hassan. I suppose it must have been 2 hours after dawn on the following morning that I was awakened by knocks upon the door and the voice of Jack saying that Sam the cook wanted to speak to me. Wondering what he could be doing there, as I understood he was sleeping on the ship, I called out that he was to come in. Now this Sam, I should say, hailed from the Cape and was a person of mixed blood. The original stock, I imagine, was Malay, which had been crossed with Indian coolie. Also, somewhere or other, there was a dash of white, and possibly, but of this I am not sure, a little Hottentot. The result was a person of few vices and many virtues. Sammy, I may say at once, was perhaps the biggest coward I ever met. He could not help it, it was congenital, though curiously enough this cowardice of his never prevented him from rushing into fresh danger. Thus he knew that the expedition on which I was engaged would be most hazardous. Remembering his weakness, I explained this to him very clearly. Yet that knowledge did not deter him from imploring that he must be allowed to accompany me. Perhaps this was because there was some mutual attachment between us, as in the case of Hans. Once, a good many years before, I had rescued Sammy from a somewhat serious scrape by declining to give evidence against him. I need not enter into the details, but a certain sum of money over which he had control had disappeared. I will merely say, therefore, that at the time he was engaged to a coloured lady of very expensive tastes, whom in the end he never married. After this, as it chanced, he nursed me through an illness, hence the attachment of which I have spoken. Sammy was the son of a native Christian preacher, and brought up upon what he called the Word. He had received an excellent education for a person of his class, and in addition to many native dialects with which a varied career had made him acquainted, spoke English perfectly, though in the most bombastic style. Never would he use a short word if a long one came to his hand, or rather to his tongue. For several years of his life he was, I believe, a teacher in a school at Cape Town, where coloured persons receiving their education, his department, as he called it, being English language and literature. Wearying of, or being dismissed from his employment for some reason that he never specified, he had drifted up the coast to Zanzibar, where he turned his linguistic abilities to the study of Arabic, and became the manager, or head cook, of an hotel. After a few years he lost this billet, I know not how or why, and appeared at Durban in what he called a reversed position. Here it was that we met again, just before my expedition to Pongo-land. In manners he was most polite, in disposition most religious. I believe he was a Baptist by faith, and in appearance a small, brown dandy of a man of uncertain age. He wore his hair parted in the middle and, whatever the circumstances, was always tidy in his garments. I took him on because he was in great distress, an excellent cook, the best of nurses, and above all for the reason that, as I have said, we were in a way attached to each other. Also he always amused me intensely, which goes for something on a long journey of the sort that I contemplated. Such, in brief, was Sammy. As he entered the room I saw that his clothes were very wet, and asked him at once if it were raining, or whether he had got drunk and been sleeping in the damp grass. "No, Mr. Quatermain," he answered, "the morning is extremely fine, and like the poor Hottentot Hans, I have abjured the use of intoxicants. Though we differ on much else, in this matter we agree." "Then what the deuce is up?" I interrupted, to cut short his flow of fine language.
"Sir, there is trouble on the ship."
Remembering Mavovo, I started at these words.
"Where I passed the night in the company of Mr. Somers at his special request."
It was the other way about, really.
"This morning before dawn, when he thought that everybody was asleep, the Portuguese captain and some of his Arabs began to weigh the anchor quite quietly, also to hoist the sails. But Mr. Somers and I, being very much awake, came out of the cabin, and he sat upon the captain with a revolver in his hand, saying, well, sir, I will not repeat what he said."
"No, don't. What happened then?"
"Then, sir, there followed much noise and confusion. The Portuguese and the Arabs threatened Mr. Somers, but he, sir, continued to sit upon the capstan with the stern courage of a rock in a rushing stream, and remarked that he would see them all somewhere before they touched it. After this, sir, I do not know what occurred, since while I watched from the bulwarks someone knocked me head over heels into the sea, and being fortunately a good swimmer, I gained the shore and hurried here to advise you." "And did you advise anyone else, you idiot?" I asked. "Yes, sir. As I sped along I communicated to an officer of the port that there was a devil of a mess upon the Maria, which he would do well to investigate." By this time I was in my shirt and trousers and shouting to Mavovo and the others. Soon they arrived, for as the costume of Mavovo and his company consisted only of a moocha and a blanket, it did not take them long to dress. "Mavovo," I began, "there is trouble on the ship." "Oh, Baba," he interrupted with something resembling a grin, "it is very strange, but last night I dreamt that I told you—" "Curse your dreams," I said. "Gather the men and go down. No, that won't work. There would be murder done. Either it's all over now or it is all right. Get the hunters ready. I come with them. The luggage can be fetched afterwards." Within less than an hour we were at that wharf off which the Maria lay in what one day will be the splendid port of Durban, though in those times its shipping arrangements were extremely primitive. A strange looking band we must have been. I, who was completely dressed, I trust tidy, marched ahead. Next came Hans in the filthy wide awake hat which he usually wore and greasy corduroys, and after him the early Guineas Sammy arrayed in European reach-me-downs, a billycock and a bright blue tie striped with red, garments that would have looked very smart had it not been for his recent immersion. After him followed the fierce-looking Mavovo and his squad of hunters, all of whom wore the ring or isikoko as the Zulus call it, that is, a circle of polished black wax sewn into their short hair. They were a grim set of fellows, but as according to a recent law it was not allowable for them to appear armed in the town, their guns had already been shipped, while their broad stabbing spears were rolled up in their sleeping mats, the blades wrapped round with dried grass. Each of them, however, bore in his hand a large knob kerry of red wood, and they marched 4 by 4 in martial fashion. It is true that when we embarked on the big boat to go to the ship, much of their warlike ardour evaporated, since these men, who feared nothing on land, were terribly afraid of that unfamiliar element, the water. We reached the Maria, an unimposing kind of tub, and climbed aboard. On looking aft, the first thing I saw was Stephen seated on the capstan, with a pistol in his hand, as Sammy had said. Near by, leaning on the bulwark, was the villainous-looking Portuguese Delgado, apparently in the worst of tempers, and surrounded by a number of equally villainous-looking Arab sailors clad in dirty white. In front was the captain of the port, a well-known and esteemed gentleman of the name of Cato, like myself a small man who had gone through many adventures. Accompanied by some attendants, he was seated on the after skylight smoking, and his eyes fixed upon Stephen and the Portuguese. "Glad to see you, Quatermain," he said. "There's some row on here, but I've only just arrived and don't understand Portuguese, and the gentleman on the capstan won't leave it to explain." "What's up, Stephen?" I asked, after shaking Mr. Cato by the hand. "What's up?" replied Somers. "This man," and he pointed to Delgado, "wanted to sneak out to sea with all our goods, that's all, to say nothing of me and Sammy, whom no doubt he'd have chucked overboard as soon as he was out of sight of land. However, Sammy, who knows Portuguese, overheard his little plans, and as you see, I objected. Well, Delgado was asked for his version of the affair, and, as I expected, explained that he only intended to get a little nearer to the bar and there wait till we arrive. Of course he lied and knew that we were aware of the fact, and that his intention had been to slip out to sea with all our valuable property, which he would sell after having murdered or marooned Stephen and the poor cook. But as nothing could be proved, and we were now in strong enough force to look after ourselves and our belongings, I did not see the use of pursuing the argument, so I accepted the explanation with a smile, and asked everybody to join in a morning nip. Afterwards Stephen told me that while I was engaged with Mavovo on the previous night, a message had reached him from Sammy, who was on board the ship in charge of our belongings, saying that he would be glad of some company. Knowing the cook's nervous nature, fortunately enough he made up his mind at once to go and sleep upon the Maria. In the morning trouble arose as Sammy had told me. What he did not tell me was that he was not knocked overboard, as he said, but took to the water of his own accord, when complications with Delgado appeared imminent. "I understand the position," I said, "and all's well that ends well, but it's lucky you thought of coming on board to sleep." After this everything went right. I sent some of the men back in charge of Stephen for our remaining effects, which they brought safely aboard, and in the evening we sailed. Our voyage up to Kilwa was beautiful, a gentle breeze driving us forward over a sea so calm that not even Hans, who I think was one of the worst sailors in the world,
or the Zulu hunters, were really sick, though as Sammy put it, they declined their food. I think I was on the 5th night of our voyage, or it may have been the 7th, when we anchored one afternoon off the island of Kilwa, not very far from the old Portuguese fort. Delgado, with whom we had little to do during the passage, hoisted some queer sort of signal. In response a boat came off containing what he called the port officials, a band of cut-throat, desperate-looking blackfellows in charge of a pock-marked, elderly half-breed, who was introduced to us as the Bey Hassan ben Mohammed. Then Mr. Hassan ben Mohammed entirely disapproved of our presence on the ship, and especially of our proposed landing at Kilwa, was evident to me from the moment that I set eyes upon his ill-favoured countenance. After a hurried conference with Delgado, he came forward and addressed me in Arabic, of which I could not understand a word. Luckily, however, Sam the cook, who, as I think I said, was a great linguist, had a fair acquaintance with this tongue, acquired, it appears, while at the Zanzibar Hotel, so, not trusting Delgado, I called on him to interpret. "What is he saying, Sammy?" I asked. He began to talk to Hassan, and replied presently, "Sir, he makes you many compliments. He says that he has heard what a great man you are from his friend Delgado, also that you and Mr. Somers are English, a nation which he adores." "Does he?" I exclaimed. "I should never have thought it from his looks. Thank him for his kind remarks, and tell him that we are going to land here and march up country to shoot." Sammy obeyed, and the conversation went on somewhat as follows. "With all humility, I, i.e. Hassan, request you not to land. This country is not a fit place for such noble gentlemen. There is nothing to eat, and no head of game has been seen for years. The people in the interior are savages of the worst sort, whom hunger has driven to take to cannibalism. I would not have your blood upon my head. I beg of you, therefore, to go on in this ship to Delagoa Bay, where you will find a good hotel, or to another place you may select." A.Q. "May I ask you, noble sir, what is your position at Kilwa, that you consider yourself responsible for our safety?" H. "Honoured English lord, I am a trader here of Portuguese nationality, but born of an Arab mother of high birth and brought up among that people. I have gardens on the mainland, tended by my native servants, who are as children to me, where I grow palms and cassava and ground nuts and plantains and many other kinds of produce. All the tribes in this district look upon me as their chief and venerated father." A.Q. "Then, noble Hassan, you will be able to pass us through them, seeing that we are peaceful hunters who wish to harm no one." A long consultation between Hassan and Delgado, during which I ordered Mavovo to bring his Zulus on deck with their guns. H. "Honoured English lord, I cannot allow you to land." A.Q. "Noble son of the Prophet, I intend to land with my friend, my followers, my donkeys and my goods early to-morrow morning. If I can do so with your leave I shall be glad. If not," and I glanced at the fierce group of hunters behind me. H. "Honoured English lord, I shall be grieved to use force, but let me tell you that in my peaceful village ashore I have at least 100 men armed with rifles, whereas here I see under 20. A.Q. (after reflection and a few words with Stephen Somers): "Can you tell me, noble sir, if, from your peaceful village, you have yet sighted the English man of war Crocodile? I mean the steamer that is engaged in watching for the dhows of wicked slavers. A letter from her captain informed me that he would be in these waters by yesterday. Perhaps, however, he has been delayed for a day or two." If I had exploded a bomb at the feet of the excellent Hassan, its effect could scarcely have been more remarkable than that of this question. He turned, not pale but a horrible yellow, and exclaimed, "English man of war? Crocodile? I thought she had gone to Aden to refit and would not be back at Zanzibar for 4 months." A.Q. "You have been misinformed, noble Hassan. She will not refit till October. Shall I read you the letter?" And I produced a piece of paper from my pocket. "It may be interesting, since my friend the captain, whom you remember is named Flowers, mentions you in it. He says—" Hassan waved his hand. "It is enough. I see, honoured lord, that you are a man of mettle not easily to be turned from your purpose.
In the name of God the Compassionate, land and go wheresoever you like.
A.Q. I think that I had almost rather wait until the crocodile comes in. H.
Land, land, Captain Delgado, get up the cargo and man your boat. Mine too is in the service of these lords. You, Captain, will like to get away by this night's tide. There is still light, Lord Quatermain, and such hospitality as I can offer is at your service.
A.Q. Ah, I knew, Bey Hassan, that you were only joking with me when you said that you wished us to go elsewhere. An excellent jest, truly, from one whose hospitality is so famous. Well, to fall in with your wishes, we will come ashore this evening, and if the Captain Delgado chances to sight the Queen's ship Crocodile before he sails, perhaps he will be so good as to signal us with a rocket.
Certainly, certainly, interrupted Delgado,
who upon this time had pretended that he understood no English, the tongue in which I was speaking to the interpreter, Sammy. Then he turned and gave orders to his Arab crew to bring up our belongings from the hold and to lower the Maria's boat. Never did I see goods transferred in quicker time. Within half an hour every one of our packages was off that ship, for Stephen Somers kept account of them. Our personal baggage went into the Maria's boat, and the goods together with the 4 donkeys, which were lowered on to the top of them, were rumbled pell-mell into the barge-like punt belonging to Hassan. Here also I was accommodated with about half of our people, the rest taking their seats in the smaller boat under the charge of Stephen. At length all was ready and we cast off. "Farewell, Captain," I cried to Delgado. "If you should sight the crocodile—" At this point Delgado broke into such a torrent of bad language in Portuguese, Arabic and English that I fear the rest of my remarks never reached him. As we rowed shorewards I observed that Hans, who was seated near to me under the stomach of a jackass, was engaged in sniffing at the sides and bottom of the barge as a dog might do, and asked him what he was about. "A very odd smell in this boat," he whispered back in Dutch. "It stinks of Kaffir man, just like the hold of the Maria. I think this boat is used to carry slaves." "Be quiet," I whispered back, "and stop nosing at those planks." But to myself I thought, Hans is right. We are in a nest of slave traders, and this Hassan is their leader. We rowed past the island, on which I observed the ruins of an old Portuguese fort and some long grass-roofed huts, where, I reflected, the slaves were probably kept until they could be shipped away. Observing my glance fixed upon these, Hassan hastened to explain through Sammy that they were storehouses in which he dried fish and hides and kept goods. "How interesting," I answered. "Further south we dry hides in the sun." Crossing a narrow channel we arrived at a rough jetty where we disembarked, whence we were led by Hassan not to the village which I now saw upon our left, but to a pleasant-looking though dilapidated house that stood 100 yards from the shore. Something about the appearance of this house impressed me with the idea that it was never built by slavers. The whole look of the place, with its verandah and garden, suggested taste and civilization. Evidently educated people had designed it and resided here. I glanced about me and saw, amidst a grove of neglected orange trees that were surrounded with palms of some age, the ruins of a church. About this there was no doubt, for there, surmounted by a stone cross, was a little penthouse, in which still hung the bell that once summoned the worshippers to prayer. "Tell the English lord," said Hassan to Sammy, "that these buildings were a mission station of the Christians, who abandoned them more than 20 years ago. When I came here I found them empty." "Indeed," I answered, "and what were the names of those who dwelt in them?" "I never heard," said Hassan. "They had been gone a long while when I came." Then we went up to the house and, for the next hour and more, were engaged with our baggage, which was piled in a heap in what had been the garden, and in unpacking and pitching 2 tents for the hunters, which I caused to be placed immediately in front of the rooms that were assigned to us. These rooms were remarkable in their way. Mine had evidently been a sitting chamber, as I judged from some broken articles of furniture that appeared to be of American make. That which Stephen occupied had once served as a sleeping place, for the bedstead of iron still remained there. Also there were a hanging bookcase, now fallen, and some tattered remnants of books. One of these, that oddly enough was well preserved, perhaps because the white ants or other creatures did not like the taste of its morocco binding, was a Keble's Christian Year, on the title page of which was written, "To my dearest Elizabeth on her birthday," from her husband. I took the liberty to put it in my pocket. On the wall, moreover, still hung a small water-colour picture of a very pretty young woman with fair hair and blue eyes, in the corner of which picture was written in the same handwriting as that in the book, Elizabeth, aged 20. This also I annexed, thinking that it might come in useful as a piece of evidence. "Looks as if the owners of this place left it in a hurry, Quatermain," said Stephen. "That's it, my boy. Or perhaps they didn't leave, perhaps they stopped here." "Murdered?" I nodded and said, "I dare say friend Hassan could tell us something about the matter. Meanwhile, as supper isn't ready yet, let us have a look at that church while it is light." We walked through the palm and orange grove to where the building stood finely placed upon a mound. It was well constructed of a kind of coral rock, and a glance showed us that it had been gutted by fire. The discoloured walls told their own tale. The interior was now full of shrubs and creepers, and an ugly yellowish snake glided from what had been the stone altar. Without, the graveyard was enclosed by a broken wall, only we could see no trace of graves. Near the gateway, however, was a rough mound. "If we could dig into that," I said, "I expect we should find the bones of the people who inhabited this place. Does that suggest anything to you, Stephen?" "Nothing, except that they were probably killed." "You should learn to draw inferences. It is a useful art, especially in Africa. It suggests to me that, if you are right, the deed was not done by natives, who would never take the trouble to bury the dead. Arabs, on the contrary, might do so, especially if there were any bastard Portuguese among them who called themselves Christians. But whatever happened must have been a long while ago," and I pointed to a self-sown hardwood tree growing from the mound, which could scarcely have been less than 20 years old. We returned to the house to find that our meal was ready. Hassan had asked us to dine with him, but for obvious reasons I preferred that Sammy should cook our food and that he should dine with us. He appeared full of compliments, though I could see hate and suspicion in his eye, and we fell to on the kid that we had bought from him, for I did not wish to accept any gifts from this fellow. Our drink was square-face gin, mixed with water that I sent Hans to fetch with his own hands from the stream that ran by the house, lest otherwise it should be drugged. At first Hassan, like a good Mohammedan, refused to touch any spirits, but as the meal went on he politely relented upon this point, and I poured him out a liberal tot. The appetite comes in eating, as the Frenchman said, and the same thing applies to drinking. So at least it was in Hassan's case, who probably thought that the quantity swallowed made no difference to his sin. After the third dose of square-face he grew quite amiable and talkative. Thinking the opportunity a good one, I sent for Sammy, and through him told our host that we were anxious to hire 20 porters to carry our packages. He declared there was not such a thing as a porter within 100 miles, whereon I gave him some more gin. The end of it was that we struck a bargain, I forget for how much, he promising to find us 20 good men who were to stay with us for as long as we wanted them. Then I asked him about the destruction of the mission station, but though he was half drunk, on this point he remained very close. All he would say was that he had heard that 20 years ago the people called the Mazitu, who were very fierce, had raided right down to the coast and killed those who dwelt there, except a white man and his wife who had fled inland and never been seen again. "How many of them were buried in that mound by the church?" I asked quickly. "Who told you they were buried there?" he replied with a start, but seeing his mistake went on. "I do not know what you mean. I never heard of anyone being buried. Sleep well, honoured lords. I must go and see to the loading of my goods upon the Maria." Then rising he salaamed and walked, or rather rolled, away. "So the Maria hasn't sailed after all," I said, and whistled in a certain fashion. Instantly Hans crept into the room out of the darkness, for this was my signal to him. "Hans," I said, "I hear sounds upon that island. Slip down to the shore and spy out what is happening. No one will see you if you are careful." "No, Baas," he answered with a grin. "I do not think that anyone will see Hans if he is careful, especially at night," and he slid away as quietly as he had come. Now I went out and spoke to Mavovo, telling him to keep a good watch and to be sure that every man had his gun ready, as I thought that these people were slave traders and might attack us in the night. In that event, I said, we were to fall back upon the step, but not to fire until I gave the word.
"Oh, good, my father," he answered. "This is a lucky journey. I never thought that there would be hope of war so soon. My Snake forgot to mention it the other night. Sleep safe, Macumazahn. Nothing that walks shall reach you while we live." "Don't be so sure," I answered, and we lay down in the bedroom with our clothes on and our rifles by our side. The next thing I remember was someone shaking me by the shoulder. I thought it was Stephen, who had agreed to keep awake for the first part of the night and to call me at 1 in the morning. Indeed, he was awake, for I could see the glow from the pipe he smoked. "Baas," whispered the voice of Hans, "I have found out everything. They are loading the Maria with slaves, taking them in big boats from the island." "So," I answered, "but how did you get here? Are the hunters asleep without?" He chuckled. "No, they are not asleep. They look with all their eyes and listen with all their ears. Yet old Hans passed through them. Even the Baas Somers did not hear him." "That I didn't," said Stephen. "Thought a rat was moving, no more." I stepped through the place where the door had been on the step. By the light of the fire which the hunters had lit without, I could see Mavovo sitting wide awake, his gun upon his knees, and beyond him 2 sentries. I called him and pointed to Hans. "See," I said, "what good watchmen you are when one can step over your heads and enter my room without your knowing it." Mavovo looked at the Hottentot and felt his clothes and boots to see whether they were wet with the night dew. "Ow!" he exclaimed in a surly voice. "I say that nothing which walks could reach you, Macumazahn, but this yellow snake has crawled between us on his belly. Look at the new mud that stains his waistcoat." "Yet snakes can bite and kill," answered Hans with a snigger. "Oh, you Zulus think that you are very brave and shout and flourish spears and battle axes. One poor Hottentot dog is worth a whole impi of you after all. No, don't try to strike me, Mavovo the warrior, since we both serve the same master in our separate ways. When it comes to fighting I will leave the matter to you, and when it is a case of watching or spying, do you leave it to Hans. Look here, Mavovo," and he opened his hand in which was a horn snuff box such as Zulus sometimes carry in their ears. "To whom does this belong?" "It is mine," said Mavovo, "and you have stolen it." "Yes," jeered Hans, "it is yours. Also I stole it from your ear as I passed you in the dark. Don't you remember that you thought that a gnat had tickled you and hit up at your face?" "It is true," growled Mavovo, "and you, snake of a Hottentot, are great in your own low way. Yet next time anything tickles me I shall strike not with my hand but with a spear." Then I turned them both out, remarking to Stephen that this was a good example of the eternal fight between courage and cunning. After this, as I was sure that Hassan and his friends were too busy to interfere with us that night, we went to bed and slept the sleep of the just. When I got up the next morning I found that Stephen Somers had already risen and gone out, nor did he appear until I was half through my breakfast. "Where on earth have you been?" I asked, noting that his clothes were torn and covered with wet moss. "Up the tallest of those palm trees, Quatermain. Saw an Arab climbing one of them with a rope, and got another Arab to teach me the trick. It isn't really difficult, though it looks alarming." "What in the name of goodness—" I began. "Oh!" he interrupted, "my ruling passion. Looking through the glasses I thought I caught sight of an orchid growing near the crown, so went up. It wasn't an orchid after all, only a mass of yellow pollen. But I learned something from my pains. Sitting in the top of that palm I saw the Maria working out from under the lee of the island. Also, far away, I noted a streak of smoke, and watching it through the glasses, made out what looked to me uncommonly like a man of war steaming slowly along the coast. In fact, I am sure it was, and English too. Then the mist came up and I lost sight of them." "My word!" I said, "that will be the Crocodile. What I told our host Hassan was not altogether bunkum. Mr. Cato, the port officer at Durban, mentioned to me that the Crocodile was expected to call there within the next fortnight to take in stores after a slave hunting cruise down the coast. Now it would be odd if she chanced to meet the Maria and asked to have a look at her cargo, wouldn't it?" "Not at all, Quatermain, for unless one or the other of them changes her course, that is just what she must do within the next hour or so, and I jolly well hope she will. I haven't forgiven that beast Delgado the trick he tried to play on us by slipping away with our goods, to say nothing of those poor devils of slaves. Pass the coffee, will you?" For the next 10 minutes we ate in silence, for Stephen had an excellent appetite and was hungry after his morning climb.
Just as we finished our meal Hassan appeared looking even more villainous than he had done the previous day. I saw also that he was in a truculent mood, induced perhaps by the headache from which he was evidently suffering as a result of his potations, or perhaps the fact that the Maria had got safe away with the slaves, as he imagined, unobserved by us, was the cause of the change in his demeanour. A third alternative may have been that he intended to murder us during the previous night and found no safe opportunity to carry out his amiable scheme. We saluted him courteously, but without salaaming. In reply he asked me bluntly through Sammy when we intended to be gone, as such Christian dogs defiled his house, which he wanted for himself. I answered as soon as the 20 bearers whom he had promised disappeared, but not before. "You lie," he said. "I never promised you bearers. I have none here." "Do you mean that you slipped them all away with the Maria with the slaves last night?" I asked sweetly. My reader, have you ever taken note of the appearance and proceedings of a tom cat of established age and morose disposition when a little dog suddenly disturbs it on the prowl? Have you observed how it contorts itself into arched but unnatural shapes, how it swells visibly to almost twice its normal size, how its hair stands up and its eyes flash, and the stream of unmentionable language that proceeds from its open mouth? If so, you will have a very good idea of the effect produced upon Hassan by this remark of mine. The fellow looked as though he were going to burst with rage. He rolled about, his bloodshot eyes seemed to protrude, he cursed us horribly, he put his hand upon the hilt of the great knife he wore, and finally he did what the tom cat does. He spat. Now Stephen was standing with me, looking as cool as a cucumber and very much amused, and being, as it chanced, a little nearer to Hassan than I was, received the full benefit of this rude proceeding. My word, didn't it wake him up? He said something strong, and the next second flew at the half-breed like a tiger, landing him a beauty straight upon the nose. Back staggered Hassan, drawing his knife as he did so, but Stephen's left in the eye caused him to drop it, as he dropped himself. I pounced upon the knife, and since it was too late to interfere, for the mischief had been done, let things take their course and held back the Zulus who had rushed up at the noise. Hassan rose and, to do him credit, came on like a man head down. His great skull caught Stephen, who was the lighter of the two, in the chest and knocked him over, but before the Arab could follow up the advantage he was on his feet again. Then ensued a really glorious mill. Hassan fought with head and fists and feet, Stephen with fists alone. Dodging his opponent's rushes, he gave it to him as he passed, and soon his coolness and silence began to tell. Once he was knocked over by a hooked one under the jaw, but in the next round he sent the Arab literally flying head over heels. Oh, how those Zulus cheered, and I too danced with delight. Up Hassan came again, spitting out several teeth, and adopting new tactics, grabbed Stephen round the middle. To and fro they swung, the Arab trying to kick the Englishman with his knees and to bite him also, till the pain reminded him of the absence of his front teeth. Once he nearly got him down, nearly, but not quite, for the collar by which he had gripped him, his object was to strangle, burst, and at that juncture Hassan's turban fell over his face, blinding him for a moment. Then Stephen gripped him round the middle with his left arm, and with his right pommelled him unmercifully till he sank in a sitting position to the ground and held up his hand in token of surrender. "The noble English lord has beaten me," he gasped. "Apologise," yelled Stephen, picking up a handful of mud, "or I shove this down your dirty throat." He seemed to understand. At any rate he bowed till his forehead touched the ground, and apologised very thoroughly. "Now that is over," I said cheerfully to him, "so how about those bearers?" "I have no bearers," he answered. "You dirty liar!" I exclaimed. "One of my people has been down to your village there and says it is full of men." "Then go and take them for yourself," he replied viciously, for he knew that the place was stockaded. Now I was in a fix. It was all very well to give a slave dealer the thrashing he deserved, but if he chose to attack us with his Arabs we should be in a poor way. Watching me with the eye that was not bunged up, Hassan guessed my perplexity. "I have been beaten like a dog," he said, his rage returning to him with his breath, "but God is compassionate and just. He will avenge in due time." The words had not left his lips for 1 second when from somewhere out at sea there floated the sullen boom of a great gun. At this moment, too, an Arab rushed up from the shore crying, "Where is the Bey Hassan?" "Here," I said, pointing at him. The Arab stared until I thought his eyes would drop out, for the Bey Hassan was indeed a sight to see. Then he gabbled in a frightened voice, "Captain, an English man of war is chasing the Maria." Boom went the great gun for the second time. Hassan said nothing, but his jaw dropped, and I saw that he had lost exactly 3 teeth. "That is the crocodile," I remarked slowly, causing Sammy to translate, and as I spoke produced from my inner pocket a Union Jack which I had placed there after I heard that the ship was sighted. "Stephen," I went on as I shook it out, "if you have got your wind, would you mind climbing up that palm tree again and signalling with this to the crocodile out at sea?" "By George, that's a good idea," said Stephen, whose jovial face, although swollen, was now again wreathed in smiles. "Hans, bring me a long stick and a bit of string." But Hassan did not think it at all a good idea. "English lord," he gasped, "you shall have the bearers. I will go to fetch them." "No, you won't," I said. "You will stop here as a hostage. Send that man." Hassan uttered some rapid orders and the messenger sped away, this time towards the stockaded village on the right. As he went another messenger arrived, who also stared amazedly at the condition of his chief. "Bey, if you are the Bey," he said in a doubtful voice, for by now the amiable face of Hassan had begun to swell and colour, "with the telescope we have seen that the English man of war has sent a boat and boarded the Maria." "God is great," muttered the discomfited Hassan, "and Delgado, who is a thief and a traitor from his mother's breast, will tell the truth. The English sons of Satan will land here. All is finished. Nothing is left but flight. Bid the people fly into the bush and take the slaves, I mean their servants. I will join them." "No, you won't," I interrupted through Sammy. "At any rate, not at present. You will come with us." The miserable Hassan reflected, then he said, "Lord Quatermain." I remember the title because it is the nearest I ever got, or am likely to get, to the peerage. "If I furnish you with the 20 bearers and accompany you for some days on your journey inland, will you promise not to signal to your countrymen on the ship and bring them ashore?" "What do you think?" I asked of Stephen. "Oh," he answered, "I think I'd agree. This scoundrel has had a pretty good dusting, and if once the Crocodile people land there'll be an end of our expedition. As sure as eggs are eggs, they will carry us off to Zanzibar or somewhere to give evidence before a slave court. Also nothing will be gained, for by the time the sailors get there all these rascals will have bolted, except our friend Hassan. You see, it isn't as though we were sure he'd be hung. He'd probably escape after all. International law, subject of a foreign power, no direct proof, that kind of thing, you know." "Give me a minute or two," I said, and began to reflect very deeply. While I was thus engaged, several things happened. I saw 20 natives being escorted towards us, doubtless the bearers who had been promised. Also I saw many others, accompanied by other natives, flying from the village into the bush. Lastly, a third messenger arrived, who announced that the Maria was sailing away, apparently in charge of a prize crew, and that the man of war was putting about as though to accompany her. Evidently she had no intention of effecting a landing upon what was, nominally at any rate, Portuguese territory. Therefore, if anything was to be done, we must act at once. Well, the end of it was that, like a fool, I accepted Stephen's advice and did nothing. Always the easiest course, and generally that which leads to most trouble. 10 minutes afterwards I changed my mind, but then it was too late. The Crocodile was out of signalling distance. This was subsequent to a conversation with Hans. "Baas," said that worthy in his leery fashion, "I think you have made a mistake. You forget that these yellow devils in white robes who have run away will come back again, and that when you return from up country they may be waiting for you. Now, if the English man of war had destroyed their town and their slave sheds, they might have gone somewhere else. However," he added as an afterthought, glancing at the disfigured Hassan, "we have their captain, and of course you mean to hang him, Baas. Or if you don't like to, leave it to me. I can hang men very well. Once when I was young I helped the executioner at Cape Town. "Get out," I said, but nevertheless I knew that Hans was right. Chapter 6